Hello and welcome to the Lesson 1 demonstration of the Beginner Drawing course. Now the reason why I decided to create this extra demonstration is to help have a visual example in sort of a perhaps time-lapse or real-time format that permits you to understand what I mean in this assignment. So just to clarify, using the tools and types of line demonstrated, study any photos, movie stills, masters, or live models you wish. The confusion point that I've run into in the past with students is study. Now, study means to visually break down and understand the constituent parts and how they relate to the tools that I showed you, such as vertical lines, horizontal lines, diagonal lines, flowing lines, line weights, etc. So you're basically learning to use your tools the same way that, say, a carpenter is learning to use their tools. The tools of line are there to give you different categories to understand and apply for every drawing scenario you might run into because they're very versatile. This basic session, this basic assignment is so fundamental when it comes to studying and breaking apart anything visual using these tools, and it will permit you to ascend to higher levels much quicker once you know how to pull things apart and put them back together using some of these tools. So constructing things and having a feeling of space is key, and without further ado, I'm going to study this piece by Alphonse Mucha. So Mucha was a master artist, so this is a master study. I'm just going to expand my canvas here, and I'm going to drop in a grayscale background. Alright, so let's take a look at how Alphonse Mucha applied the various line types to his drawing. So already I can see great use of curved lines because it's a female figure and she's clad in a dress, so of course we're going to be seeing a fair amount of curved lines. I'm going to mark those off in red just so you can see them a little easier. We have a nice big one right here as we sort of run the convex shape of the hip, so the energy is going outwards here. Next, we have a very small diagonal, a small series of diagonals into a vertical. So this diagonal and this diagonal and this diagonal have just a nice simple rhythm. And you're going to see this rhythm a lot in various contours of the drawing, and it's good to have rhythm and then some structure. So we go with a vertical line afterwards. Now we have a little more dynamic diagonal rhythm, more structure, very small amount of rhythm, more structure, and you get the point. It's basically just taking these ideas and elements and applying them to your own drawing, and thus superseding a lot of the layers between, making very amateur looking art and very, masterful and skillful looking art by applying all these lessons. This is close to a vertical line right here, but as you can see, it's very lightly convex. It goes out ever so slightly. And I'm just running the contour, the outer area of the drawing. Contour is how we're thinking when we think of line. And in our next lesson, we talk more about shapes, which you're going to see that lines have a very easy time making up shapes that we can use to construct our drawings. But for right now, just focus on how whatever visual image you're studying and breaking down is using these lines. So again, we have a little diagonal here, nice diagonal into a curve here, etc. And when we're seeing these mixtures of verticals, horizontals, diagonals, and curved lines, we start to see a lot of interesting rhythm, a lot of interesting form. Now right here we actually have a lost and found line. Like there is no line right here because it's blending in to this furry part that the model, I'm assuming this was drawn after a model, was kind of blending into. So there's no line necessary here because our brain fills in the gap. The next point up, we start to find our lines again, and we even use light mark making and shading to keep these areas pushed back. So all these things are fairly basic, and you will begin to get more comfortable with them as you start to utilize them more and more. They'll become second nature. And here's one of the ways I'd like you to execute the assignment in addition to, tracing, which is not a mandatory part of it. It's just a helpful understanding tool I'm using. So first and foremost, I'm just going to zoom out so I can see the whole picture, and then I'm going to start breaking down the various elements in line. So the head is essentially just an oval, and ovals are made up of very nice convex concave lines. So just draw that in. Next, I'm going to start moving downward with the neck, which are fairly vertical lines, a little bit of diagonal action going on. And I'll separate that part out, that neckerchief or turtleneck part right there. Then we can start to visually balance where the shoulder's going to go. Let's get a nice simple shape going for that, using our verticals, diagonals, and horizontals. It doesn't need to be exactly like the drawing you're studying. You just need to understand the parts and the lines. That's really what we're getting at here, because once you can start to implement those, you'll have a much easier time understanding and breaking things down later, so you can again put them back together. Deploying some of those line rhythms we saw earlier. I will copy that lost and found part just because that's really fun to kind of use to stop the line from actually connecting, break it up a little bit, and to get back into some of our diagonal to vertical action. Alright, just a series of nice, constructive, diagonal, slightly curved lines, slightly angled lines. Oftentimes you'll find that there's a hybrid of things going on in the line. You won't see perfectly straight diagonals, but slightly curved ones. And many things are not going to be purely vertical or horizontal, but slightly angled. So not madly diagonal as though if it were 45 degrees, but sort of a softer diagonal, like the one that kind of makes its way downward here, which could be simplified as a vertical, but we're going to break that up in that same sort of vertical diagonal rhythm that we're seeing. I'm just going to do the same on the other side. And you notice I'm just breaking this up into shapes as well, very digestible portions. I'm not too worried about the face. I'll go in and do that later. I'm just trying to get each of these pieces of clothing or each of these, limbs or parts into play on the canvas and trying to understand how Mucha is breaking them down. That nice convex shape and that smaller convex shape, we have a very strong inward curve breaking into the silhouette. We're not in the contour anymore. And we'll just keep playing those curves outward the same way Mucha did. This is a really obvious diagonal. Very easy to see how we go from a convex line into a diagonal right down there. So we'll just lay that in. And we got some more subtle line and form transitions in the clothing. It's almost abstract, but you can see where he kind of delineates all these different parts and uses mark making. So I just would like you to be mindful of that as you're working with master studies, or where you can apply various types of mark making to, let's say, a photo study. I'll pull up a photo after this that we can study as well together so that you get a better idea of how to execute this assignment. But really, it's not so much about anything but getting these lines down, really understanding these line types and when to deploy them. And then they're going to become second nature the more you use them, as I had mentioned previously. So I just keep on letting out these verticals, horizontals, diagonals, and curves, and you'll begin to start to let them flow naturally, where you won't realize you've done a certain line type until it actually begins to um, become conscious. It'll start in the subconscious, and then you'll sort of be observing yourself now during your own process, and then making more educated decisions. As far as, should I have used a more vertical line here for more structure? Do I want a diagonal line so that I can have a little more dynamism? What is the rhythm between those two like? And start to ask yourself these questions as you're breaking them down, breaking these pieces down, so that you can augment your understanding and start to wield your tools. I'm just going with the foot here. Very subtle little mixture of uh, curves and diagonals, as a lot of this drawing is. And we got our little footstool, which, as you can see, once we get away from the focal point, which is the face, things start to get a little rougher, a little bit looser, not terribly so, but just enough to let you know that you're not really supposed to be looking down here very long as the viewer. And that's a compositional technique. We'll talk more about that later in the course, especially if you have the 12-week edition. Alright, so a lot of little nice fun curves in the footstool. We'll do some quick mark making down here just because it's fun to practice. Segment off this area, make some more marks. Then you see there's tons of mark making in this kind of shadow shape over here, so that we can push the dress forward. So I'm just running some diagonal marks to infer shading. Really good to practice this. It's very meditative, very relaxing. You can count the number of times that you make a mark, or you can just try to focus on making the best mark after mark. You'll start to get the visual rhythm that I'm talking about, and you'll begin to feel very attuned as you allow yourself to explore this process of mark making and shading. We can even do some right here as we left this nice little negative shape. I'm going to flip the canvas just to check the drawing a little bit. And we'll just add this large scale cloth shape so it looks like she's leaning on something. And then we're going to zoom in a little bit and start to apply some of this subdivision to the head. So start with some of these hair shapes. Hair shapes are often very flowing, like we talked about in the demonstration of the beginner drawing course, lesson 1 or chapter 1. So I'm just going to go in, use a lot of those curved lines and do some quick shading. I'm going faster for the purposes of the demonstration so you can get to the assignment, or I can show you multiple formats of it. But you can really take your time with this. You can spend a whole good clean hour on it, or if you really want to get very, very intricate, you could spend, maybe up to 4 hours even just copying the drawing. When I'm working on the face, I flip quite a lot. You can see that it's essentially just these curved lines for sort of those sleepy, artistic, fine art eyes. And then you have these opposing eyebrows that are, running this way in terms of the energy, and the eyes are running that way. So visually you're seeing this upper, this sort of eyelid, upper eyelid to eyelash, and then the eyebrow, and those are going in different directions as far as the overall flow goes. And just take some very slight marks for the nose. They're basically not even lines, they're just dots, which is a very common technique when drawing the nostrils, especially from afar. start to fix the face shape a little. Make some more marks. Let's get a better overall hair shape. And then we'll start with the mouth, which is again a very natural shape. Series of flowing curved lines. For the lip, you can shade the upper portion, just add a little bit of line weight for that. So that's what we'll do. A master copy doesn't have to be exact because we're not trying to steal the proportions per se. We're only trying to copy the way that the lines are being deployed. So now that we understand the way that Mucha uses his lines to infer hair or flowing cloth or to draw a face, we can then start to apply that to our own work in our own way. And it's often best to take from the masters because they've got some of the strongest techniques that you can build good fundamentals based off of, and that will permit you to again express yourself in ways that really have fundamental solidity. But you do want to spend good time on the face if you are going to work with it, just because it's the easiest thing to kind of create mistakes in. Lots of proportional areas that can be rather dangerous. Alright, so sort of a quick master copy. And you can go in and do all the shading and mark making, and it depends on how much time you want to spend on each one, but it's sort of contingent upon whether you're going for more of a sketchy approach or more of a very finished approach. But you can just keep working your drawing and learning about the various shapes and line relationships that are going on in the master's work. And the longer you spend, typically the more you can kind of ascertain and retain. So it's all very good practice, and that's what this assignment is about. It's that amount of study. And the open-endedness was deliberate because I want you to sort of carve your own path. If I were to hand you everything as though it were a mentorship, then you wouldn't be able to grasp it in a way that is your own. It would be more of me just not giving you the tools but giving you the exact answer, and then that wouldn't really be your voice. It would just be kind of my interpretation and you're parroting it. So my intent for you in this course as a self-directed course is to understand the tools behind these things and to then allow yourself to draw your own conclusions. Forgive the pun, but it will be of immense help to you to develop that amount of certainty and self-critique as you're moving through this. So that's one way you can begin to study the various line types, the verticals, horizontals, diagonals. There weren't a lot of horizontals in this one per se. It was mostly just a matter of copying the diagonals and some of the verticals and a lot of the flowing curved lines. So that's definitely one way of going about it, and again you can add shading to separate form. And it's a very relaxing practice to just do some mark making, as I mentioned earlier. So that's one way you can tackle this assignment, and I'm going to show you one more before I really turn you loose to sort of attempt it on your own merit. Okay, for this next part of the demonstration, I'm going to do a study of this marine. Now, what I'm going to be doing again is to just sort of get the overarching picture and utilize the various line types in a way that showcases an understanding of the verticals, horizontals, diagonals, curves, etc. So I'm going to shrink it down a little bit so I got some more room to draw, and maybe we'll pull the canvas a little bit that way. Start with the body this time. And already I have a nice curved part for the collar. That's just the point I started from, and so the point I'll reference from is that collar. Next, I'm going to come around, use another series of curves, and then I think I'm going to go diagonal for the arm. And then we'll just kind of draw a little bit inside with some more curves, thinking about the contour as well as the subdivisions. And let's just get that diagonal part of the helmet, that slight curve upward, and that rhythm right there. Just sort of a more vertical element with a very slight curve to it. Then, what I presume to be some format of protection, some layer of protection, because he's already got goggles on. I'm not quite sure what that part is, but we're going to draw it nonetheless. Then we'll do the upward curve of the helmet down into that very slight curved but very vertical line. And there's a lot of subdivision going on here within the face, so I'm just going to draw the profile mostly. Just going to get those goggles in there. And I see the nose protruding out from that. And if you remember that rhythm that we used in the demonstration previous to this one, the Female Figure by Alphonse Mucha, you will recall that dynamic sort of rhythmic sequence of diagonals and verticals. You're going to see a lot of those smaller frequency rhythms again in things like the profile, where you have the nose diagonal, the curve for the tip of the nose, and then you go back in for some more subtle curvature for the upper lip, and then you just kind of oppose with concave and convex lines. So concave out for the lip, then we can go horizontal in, concave out again for the bottom lip, and then for the convex for both of these lips, for the upper and lower lip, and then the concave portion is right beneath each lip and above the lip. It's above the upper lip and it's below the lower lip, and that leads us in to the chin, which is pretty convex, a nice jutting chin to a fairly diagonal jaw. So that's just a quick breakdown of some of the lines that you'll see in a profile shot of a human face. And then we can start to kind of play with some of those subdivisions that we're seeing. Go pretty vertical. Again, these can be quick sketches. You're just trying to understand and apply the tools. It's not about creating something very and completely like fastidious. It's more just about getting them into your wheelhouse. So there's a nice big curved line for the backpack. I'm going to bring that out a little bit more. Another curved line at the bottom. Some sort of large aspect of the satchel here. So I'm just going to draw the upper opening of that and sort of pull down beneath the backpack like it does. We can come back to where we were with the arm, use our second diagonal into the curved portion, which is around the elbow. Bring it up again with some more diagonal, slightly curved line action. And since I'm already down here where the elbow touches the top of the leg, let's go out and use that protruding knee. And another horizontal to kind of finish that off. That nice little negative shaped triangle right there. And bring it in a little bit more. And then you can have fun with some of the details on the interior of the silhouette. They're not terribly important because they're smaller shapes. We mostly just want to capture the bigger ones. So the rest of it's hidden in the grass. Curve all the way down for the end of the leg. I imagine that one knee is downward and supporting him, and the other one is sort of upward and supporting the gun arm. So we'll just draw that later when we come back to it. I'm going to move this out of the way. And we'll just go up, horizontal, vertical, and diagonal. And the gun is going to be, since it's a mechanical part, pretty straight as far as the lines are concerned. Just going over the goggles a little bit. Scope lining up pretty close with the nose and eye area. Again, you're pretty safe if you just use a lot of horizontals and verticals and diagonals when it comes to mechanical aspects. The butt of the gun, moving past the jaw. And that's just sort of floating there, so let's add some of those quick straight lines. You got the thumb shape coming in there. Again, of smaller detail, so different frequency of line. You know, we get a little more breakup of those small shapes. I'm going to flip it so I can check the work quick. Head's a little big, so I'm going to scale it down. Some good diagonals for this sort of crosshair aspect. And some of it's going to just go off the canvas. And this is basically studying, understanding the verticals, horizontals, diagonals, and the breakup of shapes. It's very similar to referencing, because after this I could practice it from imagination and remember where some of these elements were based on the type of angle and line they create. It's another modality of understanding and a very useful one for you as you sort of proceed through this course, because this forms the foundation of how you can study for understanding and application. Got the gun strap, which I'm just going to leave alone for now. We're just exercising these line tools. We don't need to be, again, very immensely detailed with all of the noise that we're seeing. One thing you can do is just to squint so you can see the big shapes and the flow of various articles and items, and that will help you to capture the essence without getting too caught up in the smaller shapes. So I think the other boot's probably going to be doing something like that. I'm just kind of running into some imagination portions now. And I'm going to deploy some verticals, horizontals, and diagonals to configure what those feet could be doing. The other leg, I'm imagining the other side, kind of kneeling down. And I'll shade this in a second to push it backward. Because it's not an immensely important aspect, but it's there to help have sort of a complete drawing. Again, I'm shrinking the head for a little more realism. It's a little oversized because we didn't start with the head as our measuring aspect, so the proportions need a little tweaking. We talk more about proportions in later aspects of this course. So that should be fairly workable. I'm just going to quickly shade that in so we can start pushing it backward visually. It only really needs to be a silhouette. It does not have to be a very detailed portion. Mostly I'd like you just to concern yourself with applying the various line types. We can do some darker occluded spots where we squint and see very dark aspects. We can start to weight the lines a little heavier to help push some more form and a feeling of space. Obviously the gun is a very dark element, so we can just go ahead and add some mark making to that if we'd like. Help to push it back in the picture plane and help us practice our mark making. All right. So that's yet another way to use our various line types to complete a study. Vertical, horizontal, diagonal, some curved lines, and getting some darker, more occluded spots by weighting the lines. Like where points are touching and light can't really push its way into those crevices, as light likes to kind of stay separate from some of the shadow areas. And that gives you a good idea of how to study from not only master artists like Mucha, but simple photos that you can find on the internet of whatever subject matter you want to understand at a greater level. And again, this is a very important skill to develop because it primes you for the lessons where we'll be going more in depth how these lines will work for you and just help you bring these to the next level. You don't need to use, again, just what I showed you, but I want to see that in your assignments if you decide to send me them. 1 hour practice each day is the minimum for 7 days. If you want to go faster, go up to 4 hours. In these two demonstrations, I did about 35 minutes worth of practice, so it's, you know, a lot better to spend at least 60 minutes doing these sorts of exercises. I just wanted to give you a visual example without utilizing too much of your time, so you have more time to study in case you don't have a very free schedule. The object of the exercise is to choose these figures or landscapes and examine them visually and apply those fundamental drawing tools to them. The shape is something I want you to start thinking about, but mostly the lines, contour, and flow of the elements. And that's what I mean when I say study. And that should give you a greater degree of clarity when it comes to your work and breaking things down and building them back up from imagination or from reference if you so wish. Again, I've been Taylor Payton, and this is the amended Lesson 1 demonstration of the beginner drawing course. So thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next chapter.